American University Special Report. Tonight, we are investigating the Supreme Court case, Heckler v. Cheney. We are here, live at the Supreme Court of the United States, where this landmark decision was made. Let's begin our special by providing some background on this landmark Supreme Court decision.
There you go.
Now let's look at the background of this case, the who's. The petitioner in this case is former Health and Human Services Secretary Margaret Heckler. The respondents in this case are inmates convicted of capital offenses and sentenced to death by lethal injection of drugs. The inmates petitioned the Food and Drug Administration, alleging that the use of the drugs for such a purpose violated the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. And they also requested that the FDA take various enforcement actions to prevent such violations. The FDA refused the request. Respondents then brought action in federal district court against the Secretary of Health and Human Services. The inmates made the same claims and sought the same enforcement actions by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Now, let's go through the lower court's holdings. The federal district court granted summary judgment for petitioner, holding that nothing in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act indicated an intent by Congress to circumvent or bypass the FDA's enforcement discretion or to make such discretion reviewable. The Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia reversed that decision. The Court of Appeals held that the FDA's refusal to take enforcement action was reviewable, and moreover, that such refusal was an abuse of the FDA's discretion.
Now, we will go into depth into the Supreme Court's analysis of this case. The question the court addressed in this case, as defined in the majority opinion of the court, which was written by Justice Rehnquist, was how much discretion does an agency have with regard to enforcement action under the Administrative Procedure Act. Now that we know the question the court was addressing in this case, let's look at the court's decision in this case and how the court arrived at its decision. The court reversed the ruling of the Court of Appeals. The court concluded that an agency's decision not to take enforcement action should be immune from judicial review under United States Code 701, Section A, Clause 2. This provision of the Administrative Procedure Act states that judicial review of agency action or inaction is prevented when decisions are committed to agency discretion by law. The court argued that the Congress did not intend to alter a long tradition of committing decisions, such as the one in this case, to agency discretion with the Administrative Procedures Act. The court also held that the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act provided the Secretary of Health and Human Services with complete discretion to decide how and when enforcement actions should be exercised. American University Special Report was lucky enough to have the opportunity to sit down with former Health and Human Services Secretary Margaret Heckler.
Madam Secretary, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Madam Secretary, I'll hop right in. Lethal injection has long been a contentious issue in this country, but that's not really what Heckler v. Cheney was about. This specific case addressed the question of what discretion is appropriate for agencies to have in enforcement actions. So why did you think that in this case, the FDA and yourself, that you did not have discretion to enforce the inmate's requested action?
Well, Erin, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act provided me as Secretary of Health and Human Services with total discretion as to enforce action.
And in this case, you chose to not exercise such discretion.
That's correct, yes.
Why?
In this particular instance, we found no danger to public health or fraudulent action that would harm the public. Because of this, I decided that intervention on my part was not necessary.
And do you think that the Supreme Court was right to hold that your action in this case was not subject to judicial review?
I do. The discretion I used to decide not to act was provided to me by the Administrative Procedure Act.
Right.
Also, under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, I had complete discretion, specifically over the use of drugs for lethal injection.
And do you think that the decision you made potentially caused greater harm or suffering to the inmates?
As Secretary of Health and Human Services, my duty was to protect the public. The use of these drugs posed no threat to the public.
And what about the inmates?
Well, my first priority was protecting the public, which is what I did. Also, as a member of the executive branch, my job was to ensure that our nations carried out our state lethal injection laws are authorized by statute and further a proper state function.
Right, and you assert that the execution of criminals who have committed a capital offense, that is a proper function of the state?
Yes, I do, Aaron. I do.
Madam Secretary, last question. You mentioned that lethal injection, they are state laws. They're a function of states. And so do you think that a deference to states' authority played a role in your decision to not enforce the actions requested by the inmates?
Yes, it certainly did. You know, our states serve a very important role, and federal agencies and actors should be sure not to curtail or inhibit that role.
Madam Secretary, it was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Finally, this evening, we will discuss the significance of Heckler v. Cheney for judicial precedent and the implication that the Supreme Court's decision had on American public administration.
Finally, let's look at the implications of the Supreme Court's decisions. First, in this case, the court certainly upheld the rights of Congress. Per the Constitution, all authority to make legislation is vested in the Congress. Here, in the halls of the Russell Senate Office Building, one can certainly get a sense of the important role that Congress has to play in making the laws of our nation. If Congress provides no specific legislative provision for judicial review of an agency's decisions and actions, then could review by the judiciary be considered an overstep of the judiciary branch onto the territory and upon the role of the Congress? Further, is it not the role of Congress to provide oversight of the executive and not the role of the courts? This case also has interesting implications for individual and constitutional rights. As to the Eighth Amendment rights of protection against cruel and unusual punishment, is the use of unapproved drugs a violation of prisoners' rights? If so, what branch or agency has the proper authority to change it? Also, if the FDA has not approved a drug as being safe for lethal injection, should that drug be allowed to be distributed? What regulation of these drugs is appropriate under the Commerce Clause? Finally, this case brings into focus the states' rights. If execution laws are at the discretion of the states, then should the states not have full discretion and decision-making power over the implementation of such laws? What federal oversight is necessary to ensure the protection of inmates' rights while still preserving the vital role of the states?
That concludes this evening's special. Thank you for watching. Please use Engage to join in this important conversation. Aaron Robinson signing off for American University's Special Report.